We don't always notice the moment someone stops asking to be understood. Sometimes it looks like nothing. A coat folded over one arm, a pause on a porch step, a familiar house that suddenly feels like it belongs to a stranger. This story came to us because of that pause. Her name is Reese Callahan, and what happened to her wasn't about money. It was about the kind of love that only shows up when it can manage you, measure you, and keep you close enough to control. Here's where she begins. The porch light was too bright, the kind that turns your face into a security photo. I stood there for half a second longer than I needed to, keys cold in my palm, and listened to the muffled noise inside. Silverware, a laugh that didn't sound relaxed, football commentary from the living room. I knocked once, not loud, just enough. The door opened fast, like he'd been waiting right behind it. Reese, my dad didn't step back right away. He looked me up and down the way he looked at paperwork. Not cruel, just evaluating. Hi, Dad. He finally moved aside. You make good time. Traffic wasn't bad. I walked in, and the smell hit me turkey. Onion. Something sweet burning a little on the stove. The house looked the same in all the ways that mattered. The framed family photos, the polished entry table, the little bowl for keys that nobody ever used. Dad closed the door behind me, and before I could take my coat off, he nodded toward my hands. No car keys. I held up what I was holding. These are keys. He gave a tight smile, like I'd missed the point on purpose. You know what I mean. I slid my coat off and hung it. Slow. Careful. I got here. That's not what I asked. I turned back to him. His hair had more gray than last year. His eyes were the same. Sharp, practical, always a little tired, like the world kept failing to meet his standards. He glanced past me, out the front window, like he might see an empty driveway and feel personally offended by it. Then he said it. The sentence he always saved for me. Still renting. It landed the way it always did, soft on the surface, heavy underneath, like a hand on your shoulder that isn't comforting. More like steering. I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't have one. Because I could feel the old pattern clicking into place. The part where I give him a simple truth and he turns it into a diagnosis. I'm fine. Dad. His jaw shifted. Fine isn't stable. I'm stable. He walked ahead of me, toward the kitchen, and kept talking like we were already in the middle of the conversation. At your age, you should own something, a place, equity, something that can't be taken from you. I followed, carrying my overnight bag like it weighed more than it did. In the kitchen, he lifted the lid of a pot and frowned at it, like the food was making a personal statement. You still in that apartment? It's a good place. Good, he repeated, not buying it. And you're still working. Whatever it is you do. I set the bag down by a chair. I manage things. He snorted, almost quietly. On your phone. A notification buzzed against my thigh. I ignored it. My dad noticed anyway. Because he always noticed. We don't have to do this the second I walk in. He didn't look at me when he answered. He scraped something off a spoon, tasted it, then nodded like the flavor had confirmed his opinion. This isn't this. This is Thanksgiving. Family. We talk. From the hallway. Someone called out, Dad, where's the good knives? His voice sharpened instantly, warm in a way it hadn't been with me. In the top drawer. Mason. The one you always ignore. My brother's footsteps thudded closer, and I braced without meaning to. The air in my chest went tight. Revenge pulse. There was nothing loud in that moment, just the way Reese's shoulders held themselves like she'd already learned which parts of the room weren't safe. Mason came in wearing a grin and a crisp button-down like he'd dressed for photos. There she is, he said, glancing at me, then at the entryway again like he expected to see proof of my life parked outside. You really came? I forced my face into something neutral. Happy Thanksgiving. He leaned in for a quick hug that didn't quite land. Sure. So, You gonna tell us you bought a place yet? Or are we doing the same old thing again? I looked at my dad. He was watching, silent now, letting Mason speak for him. My phone buzzed again, short, urgent. I kept it in my pocket. Let's just eat, I said, and it came out calmer than I felt. I'm not here to be graded. Dad finally met my eyes. Then stop living like there's nothing to grade. Mason didn't wait for anyone to invite him to sit. He slid into the chair at the head of the table like it had been saved for him. Elbows out, phone face up beside his plate. Traffic was brutal, he announced. But worth it. Closed on the Scottsdale place yesterday. Dad's face changed immediately. Not big, just a lift around the eyes. That's the short-term one you were talking about? Mason nodded, already grinning. 3 bedrooms, pool, good photos. It'll pay for itself in a year. Easy. Dad reached for the wine, filled Mason's glass first. That's how you do it. You buy assets that work while you sleep. Mason took a sip and leaned back. I keep telling people it's not complicated. You just have to commit. I focused on unwrapping my napkin. The paper stuck to itself, thin and stubborn. Dad glanced at me, then back to Mason. He understands leverage, timing, ownership. Mason finally looked my way. You ever think about buying? Reese. Even something small. Starter place. I think about things. I answered. Thinking's not the same as doing. Dad nodded like Mason had just quoted scripture. Renting keeps you floating. Owning plants you. My phone buzzed, soft but insistent. I shifted my leg to muffle it. Mason caught it anyway. Always working. Managing. I said, managing what? He smiled like he already knew the answer and didn't respect it. I folded the napkin again. Slower this time. Different things. Dad exhaled through his nose. That's what worries me. You're vague. You disappear into ideas. I don't disappear. You don't show up, either. The room tightened around that. The clink of silverware sounded louder than it should have. We noticed how no one rushed to soften it. The words were allowed to sit there, untouched. Mason broke the silence with a laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes. Hey, no judgment. Not everyone's built for risk. Dad didn't disagree. He just turned back to the stove, adjusted the heat, like the conversation had resolved itself. My phone buzzed again. A property manager's name flashed, then vanished as I locked the screen. I took a breath and let it out through my nose. Dinner smells good, I said. Dad glanced over his shoulder. It will be. Some things still hold their value. Mason raised his glass again. Satisfied, I sat there, hands in my lap, feeling the familiar pressure settle in. Not loud, not cruel, just steady. Dinner started the way it always did, with everyone pretending we were just hungry people sharing food and not a family measuring each other in quiet units. Dad carved the turkey with focus, like the outcome mattered. Mason talked numbers while passing the potatoes. Frisco's still hot, he said. Inventory's tight. If you get in early, the equity builds fast. Dad nodded. Real value. Not this inflated nonsense. Mason glanced at me. Casual. You should look there. It's close. Familiar. I'm fine where I am. Dad set the knife down. That's what you keep saying. The conversation moved on without really moving. Zillow estimates, interest rates. A story about a coworker who waited too long and lost out. Every topic bent itself back toward the same point. Ownership, proof, permanence. I chewed slowly, tasted very little. My phone buzzed again in my pocket. I shifted in my chair. Dad noticed. If work can't wait one night, that's a problem. It's handled. Everything's always handled, he replied. But nothing's ever concrete. Mason leaned forward, elbows on the table. He just means we worry. You don't have a safety net. I do. Dad's eyebrows lifted. Then where is it? The words weren't sharp. That was the worst part. They were calm. Certain. I swallowed. I've got things covered. Mason smiled. Indulgent. You always say that. It's just hard to see. Dad reached for his glass. We've been through tight years. You remember that. I did. I remembered late notices, tense phone calls, the house feeling quieter, smaller. Dad never liked talking about that time. We're past it now, he continued, but it took discipline, planning. I nodded once, and owning something that couldn't just vanish. My fork paused halfway to my mouth. We noticed how Reese didn't interrupt, how she let the sentence land and stayed still, like she'd learned which moments weren't worth breaking. Mason cleared his throat. Anyway, Scottsdale should clear about $4,000 a month. Easy. Dad smiled at him. That's smart. I set my fork down. You don't need to worry about me. Dad looked across the table. We do. That's the point. Silence settled in, thick but familiar, the kind everyone knows how to live inside. My phone buzzed again, longer this time. I ignored it. Dad glanced at my pocket. You sure that apartment of yours is enough? I met his eyes. It's more than enough. He didn't argue. He didn't agree. He just took another bite, like the conversation had already reached its conclusion. Dad waited until Mason stepped outside to take a call before he spoke again. Come here, he said, already turning down the hallway. I followed him into the study. The door closed with a soft click that felt louder than it was. The room smelled like old paper and aftershave. His desk was neat, too neat. Everything lined up the way he liked his arguments. He leaned back against the desk, arms crossed. Sit. I stayed standing. This doesn't have to be a fight, he said. I'm trying to help you. I didn't ask for help. That's the problem. His voice stayed level, controlled. You never do. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a folded envelope, set it on the desk between us. Didn't slide it over. Just let it exist. I talked to my lender, he continued. Good rates right now. I can help you with a down payment. Something close by. Familiar area. Stable. I looked at the envelope. Didn't touch it. What's the catch? His mouth tightened. It's not a catch. It's guidance. Using your lender. That's smart. Buying near you. That's practical. And doing it your way. He straightened. My way works. I let out a slow breath. I'm not buying a place right now. The silence that followed wasn't explosive. It was disappointed. Heavy. Like I'd just failed a test he hadn't told me I was taking. You're making this harder than it needs to be, he said. You're smart, Reese. But you keep choosing uncertainty. I choose my life. He shook his head. You choose avoidance. That landed sharper than the rest. We noticed how he framed it as concern, not control. The words were careful. The pressure was not. I folded my arms, felt my shoulders tense. I'm doing fine. You don't look fine. He replied, You don't own anything. You drift. I don't drift. You rent. He said, You stay vague. You won't commit. I met his eyes. I won't commit to something just to make you comfortable. His jaw flexed. For a second, I thought he might soften. He didn't. If you won't listen, he said quietly, don't expect anyone to save you when it catches up. The words sat there, not angry, final. I nodded once. You don't need to worry about saving me. He picked up the envelope, slid it back into the drawer, closed it. Dinner's almost ready, he said. We can talk later if you want. I reached for the door. I think we've covered it. In the hallway. I paused long enough to steady my breathing. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. When I stepped back into the kitchen, Mason was laughing at something on his screen. Dad picked up a spoon, tasted the gravy, adjusted the heat. No one mentioned the envelope. No one had to. We moved to the living room after dinner, plates stacked, leftovers packed away like the uncomfortable parts were supposed to be handled later. Dad settled into his chair, remote in hand. Mason dropped onto the couch, scrolling through photos of tile and countertops like they were vacation pictures. "I'm telling you," Mason said, holding up his phone. "Refi next year and I'm pulling real cash out. You have to use leverage when it makes sense." Dad nodded, eyes still on the screen. "That's planning ahead." Mason angled the phone toward him. "Look at this one. Frisco again. Same builder. They're selling fast. Smart," Dad said. Then, without looking at me, "Some people learn how money works early." The room went quiet enough that I could hear the hum from the fridge in the kitchen. I sat on the edge of the armchair, hands folded, feeling the pressure build the way it always did. Slow. Familiar. "That's not true," I said. Dad finally turned. His expression wasn't angry. It was curious, almost patient. "Then tell me something concrete." Mason lowered his phone, interested now. "Tell me one thing you own." Dad continued, "One property, one asset, something that proves you're not just floating." I felt my chest tighten, not panic, something steadier, like a door clicking shut behind me. I took a breath. "You don't need proof from me." Dad's mouth curved slightly. "That's not how adults talk." Mason smirked. "Come on, Reese. Just name one thing." I looked at him, really looked at him. The confidence, the ease, how safe he felt in this room. My phone buzzed. I ignored it. "I'm not here to compete," I said. Dad leaned forward. "You're not competing. You're explaining." The silence stretched. No one rushed to fill it. They were waiting, certain of the outcome. We noticed how still she was. Not defensive, not rushed, like she'd already decided how far she was willing to go. I stood up slowly. "I don't need to perform for you." Dad scoffed. "This isn't performance. This is accountability." Mason laughed, light, dismissive. "If you had something, you'd just say it." I picked up my phone, glanced at the screen, then locked it again. My voice stayed even. "Dinner was good," I said. "Thanks for cooking." Dad stared at me. "We're not done." "I am." I walked toward the hallway. Not fast, not dramatic. Just done with the weight of being measured. "Behind me," Dad's voice followed, sharper now. "You can't walk away every time things get uncomfortable." I stopped at the doorway, turned just enough for him to see my face. "I can tonight." And for the first time all evening, no one had an answer ready. I didn't make it far, just to the hallway, close enough to still hear the living room, the low murmur of the television, Mason shifting on the couch. Dad stood up. "Reese, come back." I turned around. Not fast, not slow. "If you're going to walk away," he continued, "at least be honest first." I leaned against the wall, felt the cool paint through my sleeve. "Honest about what? About whether there's anything behind all this?" He gestured loosely. "Anything real?" Mason chimed in, lighter but sharper underneath. "You don't have to be embarrassed. Just say you're still figuring it out." Something in my chest settled. Not anger. Decision. "I'm not figuring it out." I said. I already did. Dad crossed his arms. "Then talk." I nodded once. "Fine." I stayed where I was. Didn't move closer. Didn't sit. "I own 26 residential properties." I said, "Mostly duplexes and small multifamily buildings. Texas, Arizona, Florida." Mason let out a short laugh. "Okay. I also have 3 vacation villas. Palm Springs, Sedona, Naples." Dad's face didn't change. His eyes did. Narrower. Measuring. "The portfolio's worth between $21 and $24 million. Conservative leverage, positive cash flow." The room went quiet. Not stunned. Skeptical. That's a story, Mason said, not proof. My phone rang, loud this time. I hadn't meant to put it on speaker, but my hand slipped. Reese, this is the bank attorney. A woman's voice came through. Calm, professional. I'm calling to confirm the refinancing has been finalized on the Callahan Family Trust primary residence. Documents are recorded. Dad froze. The what? He said. I ended the call and slipped the phone into my pocket. That was about this house. I said. No one spoke. We noticed how the room didn't erupt, how silence did more work than shouting ever could. Dad swallowed. That doesn't make sense. It didn't have to, I said. It already happened. Mason looked between us, the color draining from his face. Dad took a step closer. Start explaining. I met his eyes. I will, I said. Just not all at once. The quiet that followed wasn't disbelief anymore. It was fear, trying to catch up. I pushed off the wall and walked back into the living room, not to claim the space, just to stand where everyone could see me. Dad stayed on his feet. Mason didn't. 4 years ago, I began. This house was days from foreclosure. Dad shook his head once. That's not. It was. I continued. You didn't tell anyone. You tried to handle it quietly. Late notices. A restructure that never came. His shoulders dropped a fraction. Enough to tell me I was right. I bought it through an LLC. I said, not to take it from you. To keep it. Mason stared at the floor. You owned this house. For a while. Dad's voice came out hoarse. How long? About 2.5 years. Silence settled again. Different now. Thicker. I leased it back to you. I went on. Below market. Enough to cover costs. Nothing more. Dad dragged a hand down his face. And now you own it again. I kept my tone steady. When things stabilized, you bought it back. Same price I paid, plus expenses, no profit. Mason looked up, eyes wide. You let it go. I didn't need it. Dad sank into his chair like the weight had finally found him. You could have kept it. I could have. I agreed. That wasn't the point. We noticed how that landed. Not like a victory. More like a truth nobody had prepared for. Mason swallowed. All this time. You didn't say anything. I tried. I said, years ago, you both decided what my life looked like before I finished a sentence. Dad stared at the coffee table, his voice barely carried. Why didn't you tell me after? I didn't want it to become leverage. I answered, or proof, or a favor I could never repay. The room felt smaller, not because of the walls, because of what had been stripped away. Dad finally looked up. Why didn't you ever tell me? I didn't rush the answer, because every time I spoke, I said, you were already correcting me. No one argued. No one could. No one moved for a moment. Dad stared at the space between his hands like he'd dropped something fragile and didn't know how to pick it up again. So what happens now? He asked quietly. I took a breath. It felt strange how calm my body was, like it had already crossed the hardest part. Nothing dramatic, I said. You live here. You keep doing what you're doing. Mason looked up. His voice came out smaller than I'd ever heard it. And I keep doing what I've been doing. Dad nodded once. Slow. And the house. You own it, I said. You bought it back. Clean. That doesn't change. He rubbed his thumb along the arm of the chair. You could have held that over me. I didn't want to. The words hung there, not defensive, just factual. We noticed how the room softened in places it never had before, not healed, just quieter. Dad finally met my eyes. I thought I was helping. I know, I said, but help that comes with conditions doesn't feel like help. He swallowed. Mason shifted on the couch, hands clasped tight. I'm not cutting anyone off. I continued. I'm just not having conversations like this anymore. About money, about whether my life counts. Dad nodded again. This time it looked like effort. I reached for my coat. I'm heading out tonight. So soon. I've stayed long enough. I paused at the doorway. Hand on the frame. I love you, I said. I just won't keep shrinking so you can feel certain. No one stopped me, and for the first time, that felt like relief. I drove back to Austin that night, windows cracked, radio off. The city lights thinned out, then disappeared. By the time I pulled into the lot behind my duplex, everything felt quieter inside me too. I unlocked the door and stepped into the empty unit downstairs. No furniture yet. Just clean floors and the faint smell of paint that never really leaves. I set my bag down and sat against the wall, shoes still on. For a long time, I didn't think about my dad, or Mason, or the house. I thought about how much energy I'd spent shrinking, softening answers, making my life easier to dismiss. Reese Callahan, still renting, still vague, still not enough. I smiled. Just a little. I hadn't lost anything that night. I'd left with exactly what I needed. Space. Distance. A life that didn't require permission anymore. I stood, locked up, and headed upstairs to my own place. Tomorrow. There were tenants to check on. A call to return. Things moving forward. If this story stayed with you, take a moment to sit with it. Sometimes that's enough. We stayed with Reese there, in the quiet after everything settled. No applause, no victory speech. Just a woman finally standing at full size, alone, and steady.